ready for my 8th birthday. It was a normal night like any other night. I had, you know, been playing with my cousins and my relatives, you know. My mom was there, my sister was there, my cousins. We was all just playing, you know. It's a normal day like any other day. My big uncle, which was like a brother to me, was in his room tattooing a couple of his friends, you know, a couple of lady friends he had, and you know, he must have had about a good 4 or 5 homeboys in there with him. You know, it was a normal day like any other day. There was always a bunch of people in my crib, you know. Yeah, I stayed with my grandparents, you know. My mom's was there, my cousins, me, my uncles, we was probably a house filled with about 20 different people living in this house, in a 3-bedroom crib on the east side of Laredo, off Lyon and Tapeste Street. We lived about 2 blocks from Nixon Park. And you know, my uncle was in there doing his thing, tattooing, and I remember hearing somebody honking outside, so I looked out the window and I seen a black van. I went and called my uncle. I was like, hey man, somebody outside for you. They looked outside the window and it was like, man, it's them dudes, you know. Son aquellos vatos, is what he said. So he went into his closet and grabbed a rifle. And all his homeboys was following him. So I'm like, man, in my head at that time, for some reason, I thought they was going hunting. You know, because we had a ranch right outside of the city limits of Laredo. So we used to go out there and shoot rabbits and shit. So for some crazy reason, that's what I thought they was finna do. So I'm tagging along behind them. And my mom's on the cord phone in the kitchen. So I'm about to go outside and she grabs me. She's like, no, you stay in. And she's talking to somebody on the phone. So I'm like, all right, whatever. But I was this close to going right behind them, you know. So I was about to go right behind them. And next thing I know, I hear what I thought was the muffler backfiring off a vehicle. Is what it sounded like. It was like 4 or 5 shots that I heard. So when I heard this, I didn't think nothing of it. I was like, man, you know, that's what I was thinking it was. Next thing I know, I remember my uncle opening the door and he was holding his side. He said, me pegaron. They hit me. And he stumbled into the kitchen and he fell on the kitchen floor, you know, flat on his back. And I remember him gasping for air. And I saw my uncle take his last breath that day. I was 7 years old and witnessed the first person ever in my eyes dying. So as I'm sitting there, his homeboy tears his shirt open and he's gasping for air. I can specifically remember. And everybody's screaming. My mom dropped the phone and she's there, you know, checking them, and everybody just screaming and you know, going crazy. And I kind of blacked out, you know. I kind of don't remember exactly what happened for the next few minutes. But I remember I was outside of my house when they were taking him on the stretcher. And my grandfather showed up. And my grandfather was like, ¿Qué chingado está pasando? Like, you know what I mean? What the fuck's going on here? And you know, the cops actually restrained him, and I believe they arrested him. You know, because he was like freaking out, like, what the fuck's going on? And the cops actually beat him up and arrested him, from what I can remember. And it was a fucked up thing they did, but you know, I remember one of the cops saying, oh, it's just another one of these gangbangers, you know. It's exactly what he said. So they're loading him up. He was already dead by that time. And they're loading him up on the ambulance. and taking them. All my relatives, all my family's just freaking out, screaming and yelling. My other uncle shows up, and he loses it. I remember him grabbing a 5-gallon bucket of paint full with one hand and just tossing it like half a block down the street. And he's screaming and yelling and cussing, and he runs down to the park. Like, I don't know where in the hell he took off to, but he runs off down the street, middle of the night. So they load me and my cousins up into a vehicle, and they drop us all off at one of our uncle's house. So I'm there with some distant relatives, and they drop us off, and we were there like all night and sometime the next day. And I just remember, life. We was just talking about, like, man, what the fuck happened? Like, you think he's dead? And at that time we didn't even know what was going on. So a couple of days later, my mom comes and gets me, and tells me what happens. Like, hey, your uncle, he died. And she's still crying and losing it. So we get ready for the funeral, and at the service, there was about 400 or 500 people, man. Mostly friends from Nixon, from the high school. A bunch of his homeboys, a bunch of female friends he had. Everybody mourning, crying, and I wasn't shedding no tears at this time. I was pretty much just observing the whole thing go down, and my mom's crying, everybody's crying, freaking out. I remember my grandmother sitting by his coffin, and she was not wanting to leave the coffin side. She just sat there with the coffin, just like freaking out, losing it. So I paid my respects. I went up there and I left him a little necklace that I had. I left it in his coffin, and I said a few words to him and said my piece. I wasn't really too experienced with death at this time. Like, death to me was unfamiliar. It was something I didn't really know nothing about at 7 years old. And I remember, I believe it was the next day, we went to the cemetery and right there off Saunders in Laredo, Texas. And we're having the ceremony there, and their pallbearers carrying the coffin to, the hole where he's going to get lowered down. And it was then and there that it hit me as his body was getting lowered 6 feet underground, that he wasn't coming back, that, that he was gone, and that was it. And right then and there is where my heart shattered into 1,000 pieces, man. And I broke down crying for the first time in his death. It just hit me. I realized that, we were never going to see him again, like he was gone. For the next couple of years, my family was destroyed. Like, the household that I had, where we were all staying there, about 20 different people, everybody just split up and went different ways. Just people couldn't really take the fact that, my uncle had gotten killed. They weren't taking it very well. My uncle Macky died at 16 years old on March 6, 1996, a week before my birthday. So when my birthday came around, instead of opening presents and celebrating, which what I believe we did, it was focused more on mourning the loss of my uncle. I believe he was buried around the 10th or 11th. It's like, it was too fresh of a wound to really be celebrating no birthday, But I started rebelling in elementary. I actually got kicked out of the first grade for stabbing a guy with a pencil in the eye. I started getting in fights and in trouble in school. Mainly because, you know, my mother wasn't taking it very well either. Like, nobody was taking it well. Like, everybody was just, like, not there, you know. Like, they was there, but their mind was somewhere else. You know, their heart was destroyed. And everybody just really wanted to get high and get drunk and get lost, you know. So I do believe that the death and the loss of my uncle really messed my mother up pretty badly, you know. And my father was in prison by this time, you know. So all this trouble that I got in school was, I believe, caused by the lack of attention that I was having at the household, you know. The instability, the unstructure. But I remember a couple of months before he had died, he had shot me with a pellet gun in my mouth, and I just remember, you know, like getting picked on a lot by my uncle. You know, he just had naturally had that, you know, spirit of Palo, if you would. He just liked to mess with me and my cousins a lot, just, you know, fuck with us basically. But I remember wishing he would have died. I was thinking, like, when he did that, you know, I was thinking, like, man, I hate this dude. Because he was always getting on my ass, always fucking with me. So, you know, I remember specifically wishing he would die. So when this happened and he really did die, you know, I kind of felt guilty about the whole thing. I kind of felt like it was my fault, you know, because I had wished him death. But a week before he got killed, like, he started, like, talking to me cool. He gave me a football. He was laughing with me, you know. Gave me a haircut. Like, we actually were vibing. Like, we had pretty much had the best relationship ever a week before he got killed. Like, he was actually, you know, getting cool all of a sudden. So that shit really fucked with my head, you know. I really was, like, tripping out. Like, man, did I cause his death by wishing him death? Like, you know what I mean? It was just something that, you know, really played with my thoughts, with my head at that age, you know. So at 8 years old, you know, I was dealing with the loss of my uncle, you know, and it was crazy, man. Who knows what would have been of his life? My Uncle Mack wasn't just my uncle, he was my big brother. Even though I feared him, I also respected him and looked up to him, you know. He was a real charming, laughable, playable guy, you know. He was always joking around and, you know, just horse playing, if you would. I always had a bang load of different girlfriends over at the crib, you know. He stood about 6'1" at 16 years old. You know, he was a pretty big dude for his age, you know. He's a charming dude. He was always getting in fights with dudes, you know. Like him and my Uncle Turi, there was nothing nice and nothing to play with in the neighborhood. There was very well respected around his friends, around the east side of Laredo back in 1996. You know, right there off of Nixon. That was our neighborhood. All blind and the bested, but my uncle would go down as the first person I witnessed get killed in front of my eyes. And he died in front of, he took his last breath right there in front of my eyes at 7 years old. If you've ever experienced something similar to what I did at an age this young, then you can possibly relate to what I went through. You know, that's why I've went through a whole lot of stuff through my life. I've witnessed several people get killed in front of my eyes. I've lost a lot of relatives to gun violence and the drug epidemic. So now I just dedicate my life, you know, to come out here and speak against all of this nonsense and all of this stupidity. You know, the guy actually ended up getting caught, the one that killed my uncle. And I believe he got a 10-year sentence, man, and he finished the whole 10-year bid. He got released and is somewhere out in the streets, you know. And I vowed that when I ran into him, I would kill him, you know. I really held a grudge for years over that. And it was like, you know, it's something that I always felt like, you know, was my responsibility to make sure this guy was, you know, put on ice for what he did. retaliation, if you would. And it's like, there's a power behind all of this evilness and this death that goes on. For the Bible says we battle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers of darkness. And you know, the older I get, and the deeper I dive into the Bible, into the Word of God, and the deeper I get into meditation and pray to God, He reveals things to me. And it's like, you know, I could have easily took somebody else's life out here, you know, and somebody want to get revenge and retaliation on me. You know what I'm saying? Like, when you're out here in these streets, it's like you dancing with the devil, you playing with the devil, you're gonna get burned. You get manipulated, you know, your strings getting pulled without you even knowing. Message to all my young G's out there running these streets, man. Put the guns down. Put the pistols away. Cease fire. There's a better life out here, man. You can do anything and be anything you want to be. Don't lose your life out here on these streets. Don't lose your life to the penitentiary, you know, wind up doing some time for something that you're going to regret your whole life. Turn back now while you still got a chance. If you're a youngster and you're watching one of my videos, I encourage you, man. Reach out to me. If you have nowhere to plug in or get connected, man, I respond to all comments. I'm available out here. I'm out here in these streets dirty for y'all. That's why I do this. It's for you. For all my young G's, you know. Don't listen to these old knucklehead crash dummies, man. That's getting manipulated by the powers of darkness, you know. They just don't know any better. And you old heads that's out here poisoning and corrupting the youngest, I challenge you, man. Do something righteous with your life. Make a change in your community. Get involved and speak out here, you know what I mean? Step up to the plate. I seriously believe that, like, the problem with the gang lifestyle in the streets and the ghettos and the hoods, nobody wants to grow up. Nobody wants to be a man. Nobody wants to man up and be an adult. Everybody wants to be a youngster. Everybody wants to seek self-gratification. You know, everybody wants to be about the money, about, you know, some kind of image to where they're getting glorified, where they want people to idolize them and fear them. And all that shit is weak, homie. Somebody's got to be a man. Somebody got to man up. Where are the real men? I know that the ladies done had it. The mothers in the ghetto done had it. The sisters in the ghetto done had it. They're waiting for the real man to stand up and make a change out here. It's up to you, homie. You know what I'm saying? It's up to you to open up your eyes and your ears, man. Receive the wisdom and knowledge of God. It's time for a revolution. You know, 2020, it's time to have that clear vision. You know, the 90s, the 80s and 90s is dead. Only the gangster era is dead. With it comes the birth of a new era. The era of the soldiers of God. With all that said, it's just what happened to you. Lifestyle we are, homie.